Hi, ladies. Happy Monday. This is Bethany Dotson, yoga therapist and relationship coach for high achieving women who are wanting to break their cycle of bad relationships and learn how to finally attract Mr. Right. So today I wanted to talk to you and ask you kind of a tough question that most people don't really want to consider. And that is, are you the abuser? Are you the one who's abusive? And I know that can sound like a triggering question and a difficult one to ponder. And that might be triggering to you if you've been in a toxic relationship where you were made to be wrong all the time, or your ex-partner made everything your fault, or made you to believe that you were acting crazy. This is otherwise known as gaslighting. So, or they made you out to be the bad guy, the one with the anger management problems, the emotional instability. But one thing that I want to talk about today is whether or not you yourself are in some ways abusing yourself, some ways being unkind, being hurtful toward yourself. A quote that I absolutely love. This is by The Mastery of Love by Don Miguel Ruiz. He also wrote a book called The Four Agreements. It's a classic, amazing, amazing book. And this is from Toltec wisdom. So this isn't just something that like came out of the sky or whatever. The Toltec were like an ancient tribe in South America years and years and years ago. And so the quote is, "No one can abuse you more than you abuse yourself." No one can abuse you more than you abuse yourself. And so I'm going to talk about the ways that we often abuse ourselves here in just a second. There's endless, but I'm going to talk about four main ways that we tend to, we're unkind to ourselves. When I used to teach yoga classes years ago, one thing that I'd like to talk about in my yoga classes was a concept called ahimsa. And ahimsa is a Sanskrit word. Sanskrit was the ancient language of yoga centuries ago, but it literally means non-violence. And on the surface, most people get, don't be violent to other people. Don't be, violent to your neighbor. Don't be violent to animals. Don't be violent to, people down the street, your coworkers, your friends, your family. But one thing that people often miss is all the ways that they are inflicting violence upon themselves. And so I'm going to get into those ways here in just a second. And as I go through those ways that you might be abusing yourself, I want you to take it in and let it land and really listen for truth. Are you guilty of doing these things to yourself? So one of the big things that most people aren't aware of is that 95% of your patterns in relationship, your patterns with money, your patterns with your friends, oftentimes when I speak to women about their relationship patterns, 90% of the time they have that same kind of pattern in their friendships or with family. So a lot of times women suffer from having poor boundaries, for example. They tend to be the caretaker, the mother in the relationship. Their partner has a lot of issues. They get with a project or a fixer-upper and they get validation and they feel good about themselves when they're helping their partner become a better person. But it's always at an expense. And so underneath that pattern is usually very, very poor boundaries. I like to call them bleeding boundaries. There's no level of asserting yourself and standing up and being true to your own needs. So when we get into these patterns, these unhealthy patterns, most people don't realize that 95% of their behavior, the way that they move through life, the way that they view relationships, make choices in relationships, make choices with money, is 95% subconscious. So all of this is below your conscious awareness, right? If you have a pattern of getting with men who they have anger management issues, if you have a pattern with getting with men who are emotionally unavailable, meaning they come on strong and then they're always not there for you, they're always working late, they're always coming up with excuses why they can't see you after you've been dating 3 or 4 months. If you have a pattern with money, meaning it's always coming in the door and then going right back out the door, you don't feel like you're at a job that you are thriving and that brings you fulfillment, that is because you have subconscious programming going on that is influencing your external reality. And sadly, a lot of people will try a bunch of stuff. Counseling is one of them. Self-reflection is another one, taking time off dating, learning to pick up some new hobbies, learning to feel better about yourself. But oftentimes people tend to layer those things on. I'm going to talk about this as well later. People tend to layer on what they consider self-love or self-care activities when they haven't addressed the subconscious programming that is under the hood that is causing them to repeat their pattern. So I want to quickly talk about, and if you have questions, FYI, about what I'm covering today, or if you have comments, please drop them below in the comment box, and I will answer them as I go through here. So where does this subconscious programming come from, right? Where do we learn all of these things? So one big way is from our childhood. Most people have some awareness, right? They kind of have a link to, I grew up and my father was an alcoholic, and this is why I'm drawn to addicts in my adult life. We, from the ages of 0 to 7, basically, are all subconscious mind, right? Meaning we don't have full cognitive, executive functioning abilities. We're in our brain developed yet, meaning we just absorb what we see and we hear. We're wide open as children. And so most of the time, those patterns are laid down early on in life. Another way that we reinforce those subconscious programmings is that we will read, for instance, if you exited a narcissistic relationship, we'll immediately do a lot of research, or as I like to call it, me-search, and we will watch a lot of YouTube videos, we'll read a lot of blogs, we'll do all of this online research to try to validate our experience. And one of the things a lot of people don't realize is that when you're watching TV, when you're watching a YouTube video, or when you're reading a blog even, we tend to be in a state of relaxation where our brain waves slow down. We're taking in that information. And when our brain waves are slower, we have more access to our subconscious mind. So if you are constantly trying to get research on narcissistic behavior or looking at YouTube videos about how to avoid another narcissist, you are just reprogramming that fear-based thinking, that narcissistic programming that into your subconscious mind. And I want to say it's good to be knowledgeable of red flags and how to find them, but really what will change your pattern is learning how to reprogram and heal those unhealthy programs that are in your subconscious, that are in your body. Heal the trauma that's being stored there and lodged there, that's acting as this kind of internal roadmap where you kind of blindly go into the same thing again and again and again. So when we tend to go into the same thing again and again and again, we tend to get very negative towards ourselves. And I see this a lot with clients I work with. They tend to have a pattern of either being perfectionistic, they want to do everything right, they maybe grew up in an unhealthy childhood, and as a result of that, there is an internal drive to prove themselves, to prove that they are worthy. So they often are very educated, they have good jobs, they're motivated, they are always trying to excel in their career, but at the same time, there's this something that's missing. Their relationships tend to be draining, they tend to attract the wrong people into their lives, they tend to attract emotionally unavailable people in their lives, and in spite of all of their doing, they still tend to get into this unhealthy pattern, and over time, it becomes increasingly frustrating and they end up beating themselves up. So it's kind of a no-win or catch-22 scenario. So one of the number one ways that I see women kind of abusing themselves or beating themselves up is comparison. So one of my coaches says that the comparison trap is the thief of joy. if you've been in an unhealthy relationship and you look around and all of your friends, maybe college friends that you went to school with, maybe your siblings, a sister, cousin, somebody, a coworker is always gushing about their honeymoon, or her and her partner went out to dinner at this amazing restaurant this past weekend, or they're planning a trip to Europe. There can tend to be a tendency to look at that from the lens of, what does she have that I don't? Gosh, there tends to be a contraction internally, and we tend to start to judge ourselves. We start to feel inferior. We start to feel like we don't add up. And that can be so subtle, and it can happen like an instant. That becomes almost like an automatic program within our psychology when we have unhealthy subconscious programs running the show. So the comparison trap tends to be one big way, one major way women abuse themselves. Women are unkind to themselves, right? We get on social media, we look at, maybe it's not even a friend, it's somebody like a friend of a friend from a fitness class or something, and they just put a new pool in their backyard and they moved into this gorgeous house on a hill and it's got an amazing view. And we suddenly go into a story of why can't we have that, of how their life, they must be better than we are because they have all of these wonderful things. And we start to internally judge ourselves and compare where we are to where someone else is. And when we compare ourselves, we are not showing ourselves grace. We're not showing ourselves compassion. Most people that I work with don't know how to show themselves compassion, right? They don't know how to show themselves, to let themselves off the hook. The pattern for so long has been to beat themselves up for never adding up, to completely feel frustrated with themselves for falling into the same trap over and over. They've been doing that for years, that's just all that they know how to do. And to think of like being compassionate towards themselves or showing themselves some grace feels weird. It feels uncomfortable. It feels out of the norm. There's some resistance to it because it's not what they know. And so sadly, I see a lot of women who logically know that they need to be compassionate toward themselves, because when they start to do that, it feels weird. They're met with resistance. They immediately default to beating themselves up, to questioning their intuition, to doubting themselves, to feeling inferior, to going back and comparing themselves again. And what's challenging with shifting your pattern and shifting your behavior is that when we are triggered, when we're under pressure, when we're in a moment where we feel contracted, when we feel like, oh, we see, a friend from college who just got married and he's gorgeous and he's got a great job and he's Mr. Perfect and they're going on this wonderful vacation or wonderful honeymoon, we start to compare ourselves. We end up contracting, and we stay in this loop of beating ourselves up, and we stay in this level of smallness, right? So the comparison trap is one of the big ways that I see a lot of women staying stuck, a lot of women abusing themselves. Another big way, and this is pretty subtle, maybe something that you haven't thought of, is ignoring red flags. Ignoring red flags. I think this is something that we have all done, men and women, everybody, right? And it's easy to do because when we feel like somebody wants us, when we feel like someone is giving us attention, it feels good, right? Where our ego gets stroked a little bit, we feel validated, we feel needed, we feel valued. And that can be very seductive because oftentimes underneath, we're not giving ourselves that level of attention. We're not giving ourselves that level of, I'm wanted, I'm valued, right? And we tend to get that fulfillment outside of ourselves. And where this becomes slippery is that I see a lot of women complaining that they're always attracting emotionally unavailable men, or they're always attracting guys that have some kind of issue. They sense there's something kind of off with that person. And because he has some issues, he's never fully available for them. When in reality, what's happening is that she is picking up on red flags, but she is being unavailable to herself. She's not listening and she's not acting on those red flags. And as time goes on, the more that she does this, the more it reinforces that programming of something must be wrong with me. Here I am in the same situation again. How did this happen? And then she reverts back to, because she's triggered and under pressure, the negative behavior, beating herself up, comparing herself to other people, being in a victim mindset. Why did this happen to me again, right? And it all starts kind of collapsing and piling inward. And then we tend to get in this kind of black hole pit of despair, and it can be very, very difficult to climb out. So one of the other subtle ways that we abuse ourselves is by not listening to our intuition and by ignoring, minimizing, and rationalizing the red flags away. When we tend to compare ourselves, when we tend to ignore red flags, when we tend to get triggered and then go back into the belief and the unhealthy behavior of beating ourselves up, we tend to have, underneath everything, I see a lot of women say, I have great self-esteem, I just keep attracting Mr. Wrong. So there's an incongruency there. Most people don't want to admit that they have low self-esteem or that they have low self-worth. They want to believe it up here in their conscious mind, in their conscious brain, the part of themselves that they display to the world. But what's really happening back here is that they have deeply embedded subconscious programming that's more congruent with not feeling good enough, being unlovable in some way, being defective in some way, not fully valuing themselves. And so when you have all of these patterns kind of going on, what tends to happen is that she becomes apathetic in her life, right? She'll take a job that pays the bills, but it's safe. It's not really super fulfilling. It may be mundane after a while. It may be stressful, right? She might be overworked. She might need help or need somebody else in her department or need an assistant, but there's not money in the budget for that. And so she ends up being like the workhorse in her job, or she's in a job that is not in alignment with her gifts and her values because deep down she does not feel worthy of that. And I see a lot of women staying in employment situations that are far, far, far beneath what their potential is, because subconsciously, and again, 95% of our behavior is subconsciously programmed. They don't believe they're worthy of it. They don't value themselves, right? And when all of this is going on, she tends just to stay stuck in life. And when people stay stuck, when I see a lot of women being apathetic, and FYI, apathy is a dangerous place to be, because it's kind of like, she's given up on the inside. She doesn't really have any goals to look forward to, because deep down she feels, what's the risk? What's the point? It's too risky. I'm probably going to fail anyway. I'm just going to settle for this job. I'm going to settle for this paycheck. I'm just going to settle. And as one of my coaches says, when we settle in life, that's what we get. We continue to settle. We live subpar. We live in this apathetic zone. And when I talk to so many women, when they've gone through that behavior, when they've lived life through that lens for so long, they don't believe that there's anything possible, because they've been living their life from the belief and the viewpoint that this is all there is. And because they don't fully believe, because they don't fully think that Mr. Right is out there, they don't believe that the life they want is possible for them, they don't explore those options, and they tend to live life just from a very narrow lens with blinders on, almost like a horse that has, the things on the side of its face that he can't turn left to right. He's just got to focus and go forward. That's how most women who have this programming live. They don't allow themselves to open up. And when we are trying to attract Mr. Right, when we're trying to break an unhealthy pattern in love, you have to open your life up. You have to heal the subconscious programmings that are going on underneath the hood. You have to heal past trauma, and you have to let that go energetically in your body. When I used to teach yoga, again, years ago, I would often say, sometimes people would have an emotional release in a class, usually around like a hip opener, or when we were doing work with the lower back, the outer hips, things like that. And there's a saying in the healing world, the issues are in your tissues. So most people who have some level of apathy in their life, they haven't fully let go of past hurt and past wounds, past wrongdoing. And we tend to stuff things that are uncomfortable because we don't want to feel it. And none of that ever goes away. It stays trapped in your body. It stays trapped in your subconscious mind. And the longer we go through life like that, the more unhealthy circumstances it manifests, and the more that reinforces our programming to just shut down and live life from a safety zone. So those are some of the ways that I see women abusing themselves, reinforcing that subconscious programming. I'm not enough. I'm not worthy. I'm not lovable. There's something wrong with me. I'm defective in some way. The number one way that I see this is by comparison, comparing themselves to other people, comparing themselves to friends that are happily married. The second way I see this is by ignoring red flags, staying long past the expiration date, bending over backwards, trying to get her needs met, trying to change her partner, being codependent, right? The other way that I see this is by settling for jobs that, are beneath her potential. She doesn't believe subconsciously that she has the power, that she has the capability, the influence to go after the life and the relationship that she wants. So she tends to settle and just stay kind of subpar, live life kind of like at 50% rather than 100%. And she's moving through life like a horse with blinders on, right? And the sad part is that when we move through life with that narrow lens, we miss a lot of stuff because there's an experiment where, in a lot of personal development work, there's an experiment where, the coach or the speaker will have the audience close their eyes, or before they close their eyes, they'll say, okay, look around the room and notice everything that's blue. And most of the time the curtains are blue, the lighting is blue, there's blue seats that they're sitting in, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of blue things, so it's not hard to find the blue stuff in the room. And he'll say, okay, close your eyes. And then, okay, open your eyes and tell me everything that's red. But because they have been conditioned to look for everything that's blue, all of a sudden when they open their eyes, like the blue spotlight or the blue circle in the carpet or whatever completely becomes invisible because they've been training themselves to look for what's blue. And it's the same concept that goes when you are trying to break your cycle because you've been living in this limited mindset, this limited view of the world. You can't see it yet because your psychology is so closed down and limited, and you've been so used to living from the lens of, I keep getting abusers, I keep getting toxic relationships, I keep getting jobs that aren't really what I want, I keep struggling with money. And it's because you have a mindset and a psychology and subconscious programming that are keeping you in that cycle. And self-care and self-love are important, but it is far, far, far more than just going out and giving yourself a spa day. It's far more than going out and treating yourself to a manicure and pedicure. It's far more than reading your favorite book and having a hot cup of tea on a Sunday afternoon, right? Those are all great things to nourish yourself. But if you aren't actively taking proven steps to heal the blocks within, you're just layering on activities on top of a shaky foundation. It's like trying to build a house on sand. It's not going to work. And the moment you get into another relationship, quite likely it's going to be the same situation, but just in a different package. And unfortunately, I see this all the time. I see this in clients who've been in a lot of therapy. They continue to repeat the pattern. Most of the time, therapy doesn't address what's going on in the subconscious mind. We need a trauma-informed technique. We need something that is going to get out the blocks, heal the emotional blocks, clear out the past trauma that's been keeping you in this very limited mindset and psychology in your dating life, and quite honestly, in the rest of your life too. So if you are finding yourself shaking your head and going, yes, yes, this is me, this is me. If you find that you are, you've had an unhealthy childhood and you've tried to prove yourself by working a lot, you've tried to, get a great job, you've been educated, you've tried to do all these things to live a happy adult life, to be successful, and yet you're still finding yourself struggling with not having healthy relationships. You tend to get with emotionally unavailable partners. You tend to get with partners who have some kind of, maybe it's an addiction issue, maybe it's they've got an unhealthy temper, maybe they make everything your fault, they're manipulative, whatever. If you tend to struggle with poor boundaries, if you tend to struggle with not trusting yourself, not trusting your intuition and minimizing the red flags, and you want to stop and you want to heal the blocks within yourself that are keeping you trapped, you want to open and expand your perspective, your psychology, and your mindset so that you are more magnetic and more open to attracting the kind of relationship that you want, then book a call. We will chat. It's a free breakthrough session that we offer. So we'll get on the phone for about an hour and we'll talk about your situation at length. We'll get very clear on what's not working, and then we'll help you get to the next steps that you need in order to end your pattern. Not just kind of put a Band-Aid on your pattern, not just go, okay, well, maybe I'll try this and hopefully it works. We'll talk about the ways that you can actually end and change the pattern and change the trajectory of your life from this point forward. So if you're interested in that, book a free call. It's bethanydotson.com/apply. That's bethanydotson.com/apply. So if you have any questions for me today, anything about what I covered, then drop them in the comment box below, and I will see you later this week.